want to talk about Jesus and Jairus today, or Jared. John, how do you pronounce that?
I'd have to read it.
Jairus. I'll just call him Jairus. There's sort of a miracle within a miracle here. And the miracles of Jesus are pretty overwhelming. Overwhelming proof of who and what he is. And we should always be fascinated and amazed at any proof regarding Jesus. On one occasion, there was a real interesting phenomenon going on. A lot of your scholars have referred to it as a miracle within a miracle. Jesus was on his way to perform a miracle and had to perform another one before he could get there. You might say it was buy one, get one free miracle day. Jesus was on his way to a Jewish leader's house to heal his sick daughter. And on the way, a diseased woman worked her way through a crowd and touched his garment and was instantly healed. Now, the study of that event would profit us, give us proper understanding. We're going to look mostly in Mark chapter 5 to read about this morning. The background: in the early part of his ministry, Jesus preached and did most of his miracles in and very near Galilee, not all but most, which was in northern Israel, up near the Sea of Galilee. And after a pretty grueling day in Capernaum, he instructed his disciples to put him in a boat and take him to the east shore, which is about a 6-mile boat ride. There in that region called Gadarenes, he healed a man who had been possessed by a demon. And he probably would have stayed longer, but the local people begged him to leave, which he did. Jesus will not, has never and never will force himself on you or into your heart. He knocks quite loudly, hoping you'll answer the door. Now let's read Mark's account, beginning in Mark chapter 5, verses 21 through 24. Now when Jesus had crossed over again by boat to the other side, a great multitude gathered to him, and he was by the sea. And behold, one of the rulers of the synagogue came, Jairus by name. And when he saw him, he fell at his feet and begged him, fell at Christ's feet, begged him earnestly, saying, My little daughter lies at the point of death. Come lay your hands on her, that she may be healed, and she will live. So Jesus went with him, and a great multitude followed him and thronged him, or was just overwhelming him, getting in his way, stuff like that. The place where that happened was presumably at Capernaum. The man who came to Jesus was Jairus, a ruler of the synagogue. Therefore, he was a Jewish leader. Verse 22 says Jairus fell at Jesus' feet. Matthew's account says he worshipped him. And either way, that's absolute proof that they knew who Jesus was, God in the flesh. He accepted worship. Think about that. Jesus accepted worship, and only God can accept worship. Jairus begged Jesus to come and heal his young daughter who was near death. Luke tells us she was 12 years old, this daughter. And Jesus immediately went with him, accompanied by his disciples. And while they were on their way, he's got to stop real quick and do another miracle. Also in Mark 5, chapter 25 through 29, he's on the way to this Jairus' house. It says in verse 25, Now a certain woman had a flow of blood for 12 years and had suffered many things from many physicians. She had spent all that she had and was no better, but rather grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came from behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. And she said, If only I may touch his clothes, I shall be made well. Immediately the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of that affliction. Now, we can feel for this woman. Not only did she have that problem for 12 years, it had drained her financially, and her particular condition made her ceremonially and socially unclean. That's the way people viewed that back then. Leviticus 15, 19, and 30 will confirm that. And to top it off, no doctor could help her. This woman did something that was very courageous, though, if you think about it. She made her way through a crowd and reached out to touch the hem of Jesus' garment, having faith that in doing that she would be healed. That's how much she believed in him. She was also desperate, wasn't she? We need to reach out to Jesus before we become desperate. Keep that one in mind. The hem of his garment was basically a tassel, if you study it and research it. Every Jewish male who was required to have this type of hem on his garment. Every devout Jew had them. They wore an outer robe with 4 tassels on it, one at each corner, it says. Those tassels were worn in obedience to a command from back in Numbers chapter 15 in verses 38 through 40. And they were to signify to other people, to remind the man himself that the wearer of these tassels or that hem was a member of the chosen people of God. And she did touch Jesus' garment, and she was immediately healed that quick. You have to love this woman and admire her. Her faith may have been a little bit imperfect and even based partly on superstition. There's no evidence that she had ever heard a sermon preached by any of the apostles or Jesus. But she knew something about him. She had had something a lot of men don't have much of: gumption. Gumption means boldness, energy, initiative, the courage to take action on something you believe to be right and something you seek. Go get it. While we're here, I can't help but notice a great lesson that's applicable to the Lord's church. Think about it. This woman knew she had to touch his garment to be healed. There's many other Jewish leaders around there running around town with garments and tassels on them. Why wouldn't one be good as another? Here's Jairus. He's a leader in the synagogue. Why don't I touch his tassel? Might want to check on that. But she knew the difference between him and other men. She didn't say one garment is as good as another. She didn't say, I can touch the garment of my choice. He's standing closer than him. I'll just touch this one. You'll hear people saying things similar to that about the church today. But if we want to receive Christ's blessings and his approval, then we've got to touch his garment, don't we? Spiritually. We have to obey his gospel and be members of his church, the Bible church. Pure and simple. Another lesson is that we've got purpose in our hearts to actually seek Jesus. And when we think we know him, keep seeking. Because you can always get to know him better, can't you? If you just keep seeking and studying and obeying. Think about this. Dozens, maybe hundreds of other people touched Jesus as he walked in different places, and they weren't healed of anything. Why? Because they weren't expecting or seeking to be healed by him. They weren't real believers. This woman was on a mission. She had a purpose. She knew who to touch. Now, just as interesting is the reaction of Jesus. Verses 30 through 34 of Mark 5 says, And Jesus, immediately, knowing in himself that power had gone out of him, turned around in the crowd and said, Who touched my clothes? But his disciples said to him, you see this multitude thronging around you, and you say, who touched me? He looked around to see her who had done that thing. But the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to you, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction. Now verse 30 said, Jesus, immediately knowing himself that power had gone out of him, notice the power went out of him, not his garment, turned around to the crowd and said, who touched me? And they basically said, well, there's hundreds, maybe thousands of people. How are we supposed to know who touched you? That's basically the response he got, wasn't it? That brings up a question scholars have debated for centuries. How much did Jesus know, and when did he know it? Think about that. Did Jesus ask this question, who touched me, to publicize the miracle, or because he really did not know this woman's identity? He knew. He wanted to make sure everybody else knew. There's two possible explanations. Jesus was God, and the all-powerful, all-knowing, all-wise God. But as a human, in the personification of Jesus, he voluntarily laid aside some of his godly attributes, including his omniscience. He was not aware of the situation until it happened. That's one view. Another one, Jesus knew the whole situation before it was going to happen and as it was happening, but acted as if he did not in order to call the crowd's attention to this miraculous healing as a result of true faith. I'd go with explanation number 2, wouldn't you? Jesus acted as if he didn't know who touched him in order to make it a teaching moment or opportunity. Power could not leave him without his knowledge and his will. It is a fact that God and Christ asked some questions sometimes of humans, not because they didn't know the answer or not because they needed the information, but in order to teach or bring people around to confront their own spiritual situations. Think about it. Pretty famous question was asked of Adam in the garden. Where are you? Did he ask him that because God didn't know where he was? Of course God knew where he was. He wanted Adam to know where he was and admit it. So Jesus exposes this woman and makes this situation known. Why? He didn't do it to embarrass her. He did it to bless her and to highlight or bring into everybody's view the result of her example of faith. It takes a true and real faith. She was likely afraid that Christ was going to resent her, an unclean woman, from touching him. You suppose that's one reason she just wanted to touch him and slither on away nice and healed? It's possible. She was afraid he was going to resent her, but he put her fears to the rest, and he spoke kindly to her and about her, didn't he? The Lord had 3 purposes for making the healing known to the crowd and to the world. 1, to assure this woman that she was truly healed. Secondly, to have his miraculous power and grace magnified before the people so they couldn't dispute it. And 3, to honor the woman's faith and determination. He responded to her faith and her determination, just like God and Jesus will respond to your faith and your determination. Special note on verse 34, it says, and he said to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction. There's a fine point in the Greek here that cries out for us to notice it. Look at the expression, go in peace. In the Greek text, the preposition in, is not the usual word for in, which is en. The Greek word is eis, or eis, which means go to, unto, into, or in order to. It can mean any of those things. Why is that significant, though? Why am I pointing that out? Because go in peace suggests only a momentary relief from suffering, if you use the en for in. A temporary restful state. Basically equivalent to saying, well, have a nice day, see you later. But Jesus didn't say that. He said go into peace, meaning enter into a permanent state of peace and abide there. It's amazing what you can learn if you research one little 2-letter word, isn't it? Go into peace. Remain in peace, whole and well. Pretty beautiful. Before we do get back to Jairus and his daughter, I want to read some very perceptive observations from the expository. It's interesting that Jairus and this woman, two opposite people, met at the feet of Jesus. No record that Jairus and this woman had ever met personally before, but they did meet up at the feet of Jesus. Jairus was a leading Jewish man. She was some anonymous, unknown woman with no prestige, no resources, a life of embarrassment. He was a synagogue leader, while her affliction kept her from worship. She was considered unclean in every sense of the word. Jairus came pleading for his daughter. The woman came with a need of her own. The girl had been healthy for 12 years and then died. The woman had been ill for 12 years and made whole. 12 years being a coincidence? I don't know. Jairus, his need was public. Everybody around knew his daughter was in need. The woman's need was private. She kept it private as she could. Only Jesus understood. Both Jairus and the woman trusted in Jesus, and he met their needs because they had what you might call a blind faith or an unquestionable faith. They trusted him. Mark sort of resumes the narrative of Jairus and his daughter. Wonder what Jairus was thinking of when he witnessed what went on with this woman. Maybe he was thinking, oh, I wish that woman hadn't showed up. She's just slowing Jesus down. He needs to get to my place saving my girl. Verse 35 says, while he was still speaking, some came from the rulers of the synagogue's house and said to Jairus, your daughter's dead. Why trouble this teacher anymore? She's dead, ain't nothing he can do. Well, back in verse 23, we learned that Jairus had left his house to go to Jesus. When he left, his daughter was still alive, but near death. Now these messengers come and tell him she had died. So these servants of Jairus, maybe Jairus himself, evidently believed that Jesus had the power to help his daughter as long as she was alive. But now that she's dead, he's nothing he can do. He didn't get there in time. So Jairus must have been feeling a little sad and upset due to what the next verse says. Verse 36, as soon as Jairus heard the word that was spoken, he said to the ruler of the synagogue, do not be afraid, only believe. Fear and faith don't go together, do they? Fear and faith do not go together. Verse 37, 38, so then he permitted no one, Jesus, permitted no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. Then he came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue and saw a tumult of those who wept and wailed loudly. Tumult means a noisy uproar. So there's a lot of people around there making a lot of noise. When Jesus got to Jairus' house, the way the Bible describes it, is somewhat of a chaotic scene, don't you think? This tumult or noisy uproar, crowd of people weeping and wailing. Go to Matthew chapter 9, it talks there about the flute players and the noisy, disorderly crowd that had gathered. Jesus immediately took control of that situation, though. First, he limited the number of people that were to go with him to Peter, James, and John, and the mother and father of the girl. Verse 40 tells us that. Secondly, Jesus told all these hired mourners or professional mourners to get lost. He did. He wouldn't allow the resurrection of this little girl to become a publicized circus. He wasn't going to allow that. Think about it. He ever do a miracle in front of people just so he could brag about it? Didn't most of the miracles he performed, he said, shh, don't tell anybody. Verse 39, when he came in, he said to them, why make this commotion and weep? The child is not dead, just sleeping. And they ridiculed Jesus for saying that. It's obvious that the daughter of Jairus was dead. Notice a couple things. Jairus' servants told him she was dead. They would not have brought that kind of news to him unless they were totally sure she'd been pronounced dead. She was alive when you left to go get this Jesus guy, but she's dead now, and nothing he can do for her. The family had already brought in professional mourners and started funeral arrangements. So why did Jesus announce that the child wasn't dead? She's just sleeping. Well, for one thing, to cause us to rethink our view of death. For the unsaved, death is the king of terrors, isn't it? For the child of God, it's merely a sleep from which we will awaken to a glorious new day. Death is seldom spoken of as sleep in the Old Testament, but in the New Testament, its writers rapidly, often adopted a beautiful, full of hope kind of term, sleep rather than death. And when you go to sleep, you wake up. 1 Corinthians 15 and 1 Thessalonians 4 talk about that. Back to Mark 5. Well, here shortly. Another reason Jesus used the word sleep is because he went to great lengths to preserve his hearers' freedom of choice. He's preserving their freedom and your freedom of choice. To believe in him or not believe in him. To trust him or not trust him. He spoke in parables so that if the people hearing were skeptical or dishonest, they would not be forced to subscribe to or enroll in his truth. He'll make it available to you, but you don't have to believe it. Matthew 13 talks about that. In verse 39 is an example of this plausible deniability concept. Jesus knew very well that this girl was dead, so why did he lie and say she's just asleep? No, he didn't lie. He's talking spiritually, isn't he? He described her situation as sleep because he knew he would be bringing her back to life here in a minute or two. And so that anyone who wanted to deny the fact of the miracle, they could deny it if they want. You can believe in Christ if you want. You can deny Christ and reject Christ if you want. Mark 5, verse 40 says, but when he had put them all outside, he took the father and the mother of the child and those three with him and entered where the child was lying. Then he took the child by the hand and said to her, Talitha cumi, which is translated, little girl, I say to you, arise. Immediately the girl arose and walked. She was 12 years of age, and they were overcome with great amazement. But he commanded them strictly that no one should know it, and said that something should be given her to eat. Why is this why is this a time to think about food? She suffered. She died. You brought her back to life. Give her some food? Why would he think of that? We'll get to it. And we're winding down here. Jesus entered this room with 5 witnesses, took the little girl's hand and said, Talitha Kumai. He was speaking in Aramaic, which was the ancient language in that neck of the woods back then, not Hebrew. Notice that Jesus specifically said, little girl, arise. We see the same scenario in the resurrection of Lazarus. Jesus was careful to say, Lazarus, arise, or come forth, in John chapter 11. Jesus had to be very careful to be specific when he raised people from the dead, though, didn't he? Because John 5:25 says, most assuredly I say to you, the hour is coming, and now is, when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live. If he had just said, arise, every single dead body from all of time might have been raised, huh? Depending on who you ask. Mark 5 and verse 42, we can see a characteristic word. The word immediately, in reference to a miracle of Jesus. The girl did not just wake up in a stupor, coming out of a coma. Like when you're coming out of recovery, the anesthesiologist had pumped you up with whatever. And you're quite stoned for a while before you come out of it, aren't you? This girl did not just wake up in that condition and gradually become stronger. Her eyes come open. She got up and walked. She's well that fast, immediately. When Jesus did a miracle, the results were immediate, instantaneous, and complete. There's an interesting human touch type footnote to accounts like this, though. In verse 43, Jesus said something should be given her to eat. Why would he think of that? This also puts the parents' focus on the girl and her needs. They're indescribably grateful for what Jesus just did. But he directed all attention from him to this little girl he just healed, to her needs, didn't he? Give your attention to her. Tend to her needs. Outside the door, there were all these professional mourners suddenly out of a job, huh? A good part of the city was waiting for some kind of news. The girl needs to be cared for. Don't worry about publicity. Don't worry about giving credit to me or anybody else. Take care of that girl. Don't make a spectacle of her or me. The act of eating in and of itself serves as proof that this girl is alive and able to function, but she's probably been a while since she ate. She's hungry. Feed her. One of the first things Jesus did was to assure his disciples of his resurrection was what? He ate. Luke chapter 24. After Jesus was raised from the dead, he hosted a fish dinner by the sea for his disciples in John chapter 21. And when the Lord returns and raises us from the dead, what's going to happen? First, the judgment, but then the marriage supper of the Lamb. Revelation 19, verses 6 through 10 says, And I heard, as it were, the voice of a great multitude, as the sound of many waters, and as the sound of mighty thundering, saying, Alleluia, for the Lord God omnipotent reigns. Let us be glad and rejoice and give him glory, for the marriage of the Lamb has come, and his wife has made herself ready, and to her it was granted to be arrayed in fine linen, clean and bright. And the fine linen is the righteous acts of the saints. Then he said to me, Blessed are those who are called to the marriage supper of the Lamb. And he said to me, These are the true sayings of God. eating, supping was always a big deal with the Lord, wasn't it? It's a pretty amazing account. A miracle within a miracle, sort of. A guy named Brooks wrote, "The raising of Jairus' daughter from the dead is a reminder that all who die in the Lord shall be raised, because death is only a sleep." Some people call it a nap. John 5, 1 Thessalonians 4 confirms that. The raising of Jairus' daughter from the dead is a reminder that death does not conquer us. It does not have the last word in the life of a Christian. As far as the Christian is concerned, death is not a period, it's a comma. A lot of people don't look at it that way. But it's not a period or an ending. It's a comma, to be continued. The raising of Jairus' daughter from the dead is a reminder that the day will come when there will be no more separation. We will be reunited with all of those that we've known and loved and cared for throughout our life. Let's stay united right now in Christ, and so that we can become united together later after the judgment. Not just in Christ, but with Christ and with God for eternal pleasure. If you got anything you want to share with the congregation today, please let us know here in a couple of seconds when we stand and sing our song. Don't forget, Barbara's got some little snack bags for everybody, and Tim will close us in prayer after our closing song, and he'll also include thanks for the lunch we're all about to enjoy. Anybody got anything?